Now, Silicon Valley has always been a very interesting animal in itself. But when you're talking about money, follow the money. Okay, we're going to start here with First Republic. Now, this says Chase just bought your bank. What First Republic bank customers need to know now. So what we found out after the Silicon Valley incident, which I'm going to talk about more later in the story, is a lot of the VCs stepped up and said, hey, put your money at First Republic. They're not going to have the same problems. They're solid. And we knew that it would be the next one to collapse. So they went ahead and had to have a government seizing of the assets. And then they took bids. And of course, JP Morgan Chase was the winner. A lot of outcome that's going to come out of this, whether or not it's clear on the surface. Let's go ahead and look at a few here. So now it says you and your assets are now backed by the fortress balance sheets of JP Morgan Chase, and all your deposits are protected. JP Morgan told customers in a statement on the First Republic's website on Monday. Well, let's just check out Chase as we whittle on down this road. Let's swing over here, first of all, to Silicon Valley Bank. Now, we know that one of the challenges with Silicon Valley Bank was the actual lack of fiscal knowledge, lack of banking knowledge, industry knowledge, but hey, they were really strong on the woke agendas. Now, you could say, hey, maybe this is a joke, maybe this isn't real, maybe it's slanted. This was from the New York Post, posted on March 11th. But the reality is, as they look through the board members, that they were really heavy on who they were going to invest money with and how they were going to educate themselves to be woke in the world, but very light on actual institutional banking knowledge. And they were preyed upon. This was their fault. They set it up, but they were set up for that reason. A lot of money moved through there, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a couple more slides here. And this wasn't a shock to any of us who live in the area, who have seen the decline of this bank over the years. They cared more about the global initiatives than they did about actual finance, and certainly about Silicon Valley. So if we move on to the next one here, and it looks like the computer's running slow. So let's see if this will come up. You see, I get all the tags ready to go. And I've often joked that I could be in the middle of Africa or the Amazon and have faster internet from here. But let's see what I'll pull up. Okay, so here we go. The next one on the list here is a perspective, a global study that was created on ESG score. Now, ESG has really been related over the last decade or so to social governance, right? So how are you measuring up in relation to a measuring stick that somebody created? But generally, as I said, it's been businesses or banking institutions. What is the ESG score? But as we saw over the last few years, that crept very, very quickly into an overlay of individuals as brought on by a specific government. And as individuals start to get measured up for satisfying their score, they either have access to their funds or they get locked out. And in this case, this was a 2022 study, and it looks like it's still frozen here. Many investors are contemplating how to integrate environmental, social governance, ESG, issues into their investing decisions. Okay, so they're going to go a little bit more into this. How do you invest wisely and for a global nature? Clearly, this is part of the woke agenda. But what's interesting here is as we move forward, we saw in Canada during the truck carnival that they had, that people's bank accounts were actually frozen, and not the big bank accounts that we saw in other situations, but Joe Schmo on the street with a tow truck that didn't tow another truck out of the way, all of a sudden his bank account got frozen. And in some cases, it was months and months before they got access to their funds again. It's a very scary process when you're a hard worker, you put your funds in the bank, use that to pay your mortgage, and you don't even have access to the funds. So ESG is something you want to keep your eye on. What's interesting is back in November, December, there was a report that came out that the top 6 banks in the US were now participating as a study in ESG for individuals. And those banks were JP Morgan. So we've got that named here. We've got Wells Fargo, which I'll bring up in a minute, Bank of America, Citibank, and Merrill Lynch was on that list. And I can't remember the 6th right now. Yeah, I said Citi already. So we know that the banking industry had already started, and by test market or study, they were doing it. They were already tracking it down. What are your spending habits? What are your interactions with the bank, the teller? If you go in and you didn't have the thing over your face, did you have a complaint? Well, that wouldn't look good on you, even though somebody else randomly made up a rule that's your fault for not following it, right? So this ESG is slanted, and it's a game that's being created with rules that we haven't agreed to. So there's quite a bit of information on the net on ESG. Here we have ESG Insight, ESG ranking of world's biggest banks. BNP takes the top spot, followed by Standard Chartered, Citi, and HSBC. So if you wanted to look through this list here, you can see how they're being ranked. So somebody gave them the rules, and they are following by those particular set of rules. Are they playing fair? Well, we'll see a little bit more about the banking industry as we go down this rock. But what we do know is they aim to support this global initiative, and they will put that above all else. Okay, so now if we get into Sequoia Capital is one of the VC firms that's based on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, Menlo Park area. And you can look through their holdings. It'd be just like any other VC firms. They have their various holdings. You can see where they're putting their money, how they're diversified. But you'll also see a pattern on the types of businesses that they are funding. And then even more importantly, who they're funding. So where's the money coming from? Where's it going? And who's being looped in to receive massive amount of cash along the way? Now, some of it may or may not be as obvious right here on the website, but as you're into the VC world and you're understanding the flow of cash, it's really an aha moment that, yeah, of course, yeah. But as we move forward, I want to take a peek here at something I caught yesterday, and I had not seen it laid out so eloquently. We're not going to play this right now, but I do want to direct you to this link. And I was told I can't actually include this link in the video, if it's going on YouTube. But I would like you to see what the title is if you want to go over there. So this was on Bannon's. This was Colonel Derek Harvey. And this was actually 18 hours ago. Today's May 3rd. So it would have been on May 2nd. Yesterday's when I saw it. It's really interesting. It's talking about the flow of money from a particular country that we're worried about right now. That money being funneled directly through these VC arms. And one of the core VC arms, in this case, where most of their work has been dedicated, was with Sequoia. So you can find out a little bit more about what they're saying about the Sequoia link. And then when the money comes out the other side, where's it actually trailing back to? Really an interesting study that they put together, and quite insightful, knowing that your taxpayer dollar is funding the move of assets and industry and labor away from the United States. And how do we know that the taxpayer dollar? Not only can we follow the stream of funds into the bank, but we've also seen major pensions are tied up in this. In this case, this was Fox News, and the date on this was September 2nd, 2021. So we're going back a little ways here. This information has been known. And I've often tried to wake people up and say, hey, there was a joke at, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Do you know where your something is? Well, in this case, where is your pension? You don't have a pension. Now, you may have worked for the last 30 years of your life building a pension, but there is no money there. The money has been run on a a pyramid scheme. So the only way people are getting paid out today is because there's still people working and paying into the system. Very similar to Social Security. There's money that being pulled in to help fund it. But the California pension system invested more than $490 million in this particular country's companies. Now, one of the initiatives that got pushed forward in 2016, and an EO, an executive order, stated that any funds that moved from the United States over to this particular country could no longer be on the balance sheets, specifically stating that the CEOs could not count their income, that would be projected based on stock level and growth, that, all these different factors that go into it. They can't include the money that's in this country because that country had already changed the rules, stating that once foreign countries put money into their country, it was now their asset, meaning it's not going back. So any money there was one way, and it can grow tenfold, 100-fold within the country, but the assets are not to be removed under that country's law. Therefore, it should be off the books here. But here's another example of hardworking Americans, more than 490 million put into these companies rather than American-owned companies. Now, since then, we heard of the large amounts from FTX that were put over there. We've heard in many different scenarios, but we do know that these major pension systems don't just have money sitting there. They're put into investments, and most of the investments are not for American made because they're run by woke organizations. So if we look here, how much is your bank helping you? Now, Bank of America in California is the arm that runs social programs. So for instance, if you find yourself in an unemployed situation and you apply for unemployment, the card would come from Bank of America. Bank of America it treats people just like you're being churned through. There's not the same respect that you might find in some of the other banks because of the clientele that they typically deal with. They don't want to answer the questions with the cards. They'll say, just go call on the card. And they become very short with the clients. Well, it got so much so that after the COVID scenario, the bank petitioned California to let it out of its contract. It said, we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to participate in these funds because there were so many problems with the funding, the identifying people, going to the wrong people. And it was really draining on their accounts, which I think is laughable because they got paid a very high percentage to do this. The amount the Bank of America was paid in order to manage this system was quite significant, also out of taxpayer dollars. However, they're like, enough is enough. And the state of California came back and said, no, unilaterally, we're telling you, you have to do this. So Bank of America has already stood up to California and backed down. But in this case, this was January of this year. Bank of America was slammed after money suddenly disappears from accounts. How do you have money missing from your account? Well, do you remember having the old bank books where you would literally write in on the bank line how much money was put in, the deposit amount, how much money was withdrawn? The banker there would stamp it, and that's what you had. That was your record. Well, often I would notice that the information written was wrong, where a little more had been put in the cash drawer and a little less had been written on in my note. And I was quite young then. So if we move forward now, this is all electronic. There's really no way to track it. Money from one day to another can be missing, and there's not much we can do about it. But in this case, in January, quite a few people were noticing that, wait a minute, the money is not there, or part of the money is not there. It's not adding up. So there was a conversation around this. I don't know how they ended up resolving it. I couldn't find a story on what they ended up doing, but many people ended up paying overdraft fees. It went on, but your money wasn't safe was the point. And then if we look at this company, Wells Fargo over the year has done an amazing amount of let's just say value decisions that I wouldn't have made. But here we have consumerfinance.gov. According to the bank's own analysis, employees opened more than 2 million deposit and credit card accounts that may not have been authorized by consumers. Wells Fargo will pay restitution to all victims and a $100 million fine to CFPB's civil penalty fund. Now we know that $100 million fine is a tax, right? It didn't go to the people. And there was no clarification on what the restitution actually was, other than maybe closing their accounts. They certainly weren't going to go back and fix the credit reports that may have been changed because of this. But it's quite significant. It said there were about 1.5 million different accounts opened. Here it says 2 million accounts under people's social security number without their knowledge and certainly not their approval. And then if we go here, well, what about metals? There's been a lot of talk about moving your monies into gold or silver at this point. Well, in this case, this is JP Morgan, and this was, if the date's going to show here. So in November of 2021, JP Morgan to pay $60 million to settle precious metal spoofing lawsuit. And that included a $436 million criminal fine. So let's go a little bit up here. This gives a little bit more information. JP Morgan Chase agreed to pay a total of $920 million in penalty to settle a U.S. investigation into the company's alleged manipulation of the metal and treasuries market. So they were devaluing treasuries, but specifically what we had uncovered was gold and silver prices were forced down. And there's a whole number of reasons. And in fact, there was a bank loan from JP Morgan over to a Bank of America that was, there's a whole bunch that goes on behind this. But the bottom line is this bank was manipulating the metals market. And in this case, got caught. I have to kind of cynically say they didn't pay enough under the table, but in this case, they paid a hefty fine. But do you know what? Immediately after this, they were put back in charge by the US government for the oversight of the metals market. So it's a slap on the wrist in one side, and then a payment of funds on the other. So again, I want to bring us back to this Rumble. Again, at Bannon's War Room. Colonel Derek Harvey, this was posted yesterday, so that's May 2nd. And Rumble's a little more challenging to use, as you guys know that have come on over from YouTube. But essentially, they go into quite depth of the flow of funds from one particular country through our banking system, primarily through the investment arm, and then how it's funneled right back in. And the small investment can quickly grow to hundreds or thousands of different investments worth trillions. But meanwhile, it's undermining the foundations of the US economy, the US labor market, US intellectual property. It's all being eroded and given overseas, and all in the name of greed. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that brief conversation. Now, also, I wanted to look at this. Wired put up, see if I think this one will come up a little bit better here. Wired magazine, Chinese VCs lived the Silicon Valley high life. Now the party's over. Well, it's not quite over yet. But what's interesting is it's really highlighting the influence that we have from overseas. And in this particular article, this country's being targeted, but we have to understand that it isn't somebody coming over here and investing. It's all run by their government, and their government has long-term plans based on their vision of the direction they want the world to go. And they're not looking to have the United States be one of their competitors, right? They want to take charge and dictate the next whatever period of life we have left on this planet. So the story is actually interesting, and it does paint a picture here. So this was from Wired magazine, and the article is Chinese VCs live the Silicon Valley high life. Now, again, Chinese VC, we're going to see some of these core words again. Silicon Valley Bank, Silicon Valley Sequoia Capital. We've got VCs are tied to Sequoia Capital, and also Silicon Valley Bank was heavy on the VC side. This all ties together. But what I want to remind you is, as we go through, there's only so many balls we can juggle at one time. And as we look at this, I can't worry so much about that over there. I have to worry about this over here. What am I accountable for? What am I responsible for? What am I creating? And what can I protect? And so in any of these points of information that I try to bring forward, you're going to notice that none of this was possible if the Americans truly believed in America and created Made in America and honored that. That's not to say that we can't be proud of other people in other countries, because it's great that we're all on this planet together. But as we saw during the last few years, we're not really in this all together. There are initiatives taking place that are not in everybody's best interest. And until you have your home secure, or until you have your pitcher of water full, how do you give to others? And in this case, our own people have decided to drill holes in our pitcher. The old proverbial song, there's a hole in the bucket. There's lots of holes in the bucket. And it's been drilled by us, people like us. And meanwhile, countries around the planet have run in with their buckets in order to grab the leaks that we have drilled for them. Now, although they helped provide the drills, this is what's going on. So if we look in a few different directions, we've all heard the information from Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and seen firsthand what the United States has done around the world. We are not clean in all of this. We have a lot to ask for forgiveness for. But just as our country has been opportunistic, we still have a lot of citizens and individuals who are very kind and caring and focus on values of family. And for that, we continue to hold up who we are and what our path is. But some of these countries, like the one we have on the screen here, doesn't have the same values. Now, the people within it might, because as I said in the last segment, and I'll continue to always say, anywhere on the planet, you're going to find a father who wants the best for his family and a mother who loves the family more than, you flip the roles, it's all the same. We want the best for our families. But within the greed that's bubbling up to the top, we're seeing that the politicians who have put themselves in that role and squatted in that position are not the same as you and I. And how do we know that? We can look at this article as just a quick example. Pelosi continues massive private jet spending even after she relinquished her leadership post. She is no longer Speaker of the House, and yet apparently she's still flying around on your tax dollar as if she's still commanding that leadership, that role, those funds. California Rep. Nancy Pelosi has continued her jet setting ways despite relinquishing her leadership post and pushing for aggressive climate policies. She wants climate policies pushed while flying around in a private jet, according to Fox News. The former Democratic leader's campaign distributed, look at that, $43,000 on private jet travel with this company in March alone, and appears to be the biggest private jet spender during the first quarter of the year. She's now spent nearly $700,000 on charter aircraft in recent years. She couldn't fly like regular people. This is a tax dollar again. And if she needs different transportation as a federal employee, I had to get myself to work, and I didn't make nearly close to her salary. How is it that she's not responsible for getting herself to work? And all these junket trips that she's creating, it's part of the jellyfish scenario as they undermine our country. But you know what else ties in here? Pelosi, San Francisco. Husband is an investment banker. They're all tied into the same. You wonder why these banks are getting bailed out over here on the West Coast? Because who has their money invested in them? If you take the same bank and let's say the Midwest that is there to support the farmers, as an example, we're not going to see the bailout. But as Silicon Valley, a namesake, and Silicon Valley with its woke programs continues to push the global agenda, they will be continued to be bailed out. All right, so I want to point out one more time. I hope that you do take a moment and go to this Rumble article. This is on Steve Bannon's link on Rumble. And again, this is listening to Colonel Derek Harvey. And quite a bit of information there. All right, once again, I send you blessings and keep asking questions.